The Alvari orbital systems died in perfect, silent sequence. One by one, the luminescent silver spires of the capital station flickered and went dark against the void. On the primary terminal, a single, primitive logistics application was loading a progress bar. The estimated time to total economic collapse was 30 seconds. I have to confess something. We truly believed we were the apex predators of this sector, but the legal trap we built simply locked us inside the cage with them. Keep listening. The metallic tang of victory had tasted so sweet. Only 3 hours earlier, Valen had been staring at his own reflection in a half-filled silver ceremonial wine glass, admiring the sharp lines of his freshly tailored ministerial robes. As the youngest trade minister ever appointed to the High Council, Valen had a point to prove. The older ministers whispered about his lack of experience. They suggested he was too eager, too green for the Obsidian assessment desk. He intended to silence their murmurs today by executing the most lucrative asset seizure in planetary history. His target was a battered, blocky vessel that had just lumbered into Docking Bay 4. It was called the Merchant's Luck. It belonged to a new species calling themselves humans. Beneath the vaulted ceilings of the customs hall, the air smelled of ozone and polished chrome. Valen stood tall. He tapped his long, silver fingers against the desk surface. The Alvari economy was a masterpiece of exploitation. They did not fight wars. They wrote contracts. They suffocated entire star systems in bureaucratic debt. Valen had studied the human profile meticulously. They were a young species, barely spacefaring by High Council standards. Their legal frameworks were reportedly chaotic. Relying on this, Valen had spent the last 3 nights over-preparing. He had drafted 70 pages of fabricated tax violations, obscure tariff clauses, and jurisdictional loopholes specifically designed to trap a disorganized mind. The plan was flawless. Overcharge the primitives until they could not pay, then legally confiscate their cargo. Their technology was crude, but their quantum core designs would fetch a massive bounty on the black market. The airlock hissed open. A human female stepped onto the gleaming deck. Her manifest listed her as Sarah Miller, logistics expert. Valen observed her with calculated disdain. She wore a faded synthetic jacket. Her posture lacked the rigid elegance of Alvari nobility. She looked like someone who spent her life counting copper credits in a dusty, dimly lit warehouse. "Welcome to the Alvari capital," Valen declared. His voice echoed with engineered authority through the chamber. "Please present your trade manifest." Sarah Miller did not look intimidated by the sweeping architecture. She walked straight to the desk and set down a small digital ledger. It was a blocky, outdated device with a cracked screen. The ledger beeped faintly, a pathetic sound in the grand hall of Alvari commerce. To Valen, that little device represented everything inferior about humanity. It was merely functional, utterly devoid of artistry. It was the physical embodiment of their weakness. "Standard shipment," she said. Her voice was flat. "Industrial components, raw silicates, and 24 crates of navigational hardware." Valen smiled. It was the tight, practiced expression of a predator closing its jaws. He slid a data stylus across the desk. His hands felt slightly clammy inside his ceremonial gloves. "There is a complication, Miss Miller," Valen said smoothly. "Under Imperial Code Section 419, your vessel lacks the proper hyperspace transit permits for this sector. The retroactive fines exceed the total value of your cargo." He waited for the outrage. He expected her to shout. He expected her to beg, or perhaps threaten violence. The older ministers always documented that these lower-tier species were highly emotional when cornered. Valen braced his stance for a primitive outburst. She just tilted her head. A soft chime echoed from her wrist console. She ignored the notification. She looked at the 70 pages of digital legalese displayed on the terminal between them. She looked at the armed Alvari guards flanking the massive doorway. Finally, her gaze dropped back to the small digital ledger sitting on the desk. "You are seizing the cargo," Sarah stated. "It is a legal confiscation," Valen corrected immediately. "You will leave the cargo. Your ship is impounded until the debt is cleared." This ledger will record your outstanding balance to the Empire. She should have been panicking. The loss of a ship and cargo of this magnitude would bankrupt any independent merchant. Wait, why was her breathing so steady? Valen's primary heart skipped a beat. A faint gray discoloration began to creep up the back of his neck, a physiological betrayer of his sudden, spiking unease. He had anticipated every legal defense. He had prepared for physical resistance. He had absolutely not prepared for absolute compliance. Okay, Sarah said. Valen blinked, his silver eyelashes fluttering. Okay, you want the cargo. You claim the debt. She reached out and tapped the cracked screen of her small digital ledger. The transaction is approved. The crates are yours. Valen stared at her. The silence in the customs hall suddenly felt suffocating, pressing in on his chest. He had won. He had successfully executed the largest single seizure of the cycle without a single drawn weapon. Yet, looking at the small digital ledger, he felt an inexplicable crawling dread. Guards! Valen ordered. His voice cracked slightly, losing its engineered authority. Open the crates. Inventory the technology. The heavy magnetic locks on the human shipping containers disengaged with a loud, echoing clank. Valen stepped around the obsidian desk, driven by a sudden desperation to see the physical proof of his triumph. The guards pried the reinforced lids open. Inside, there was no gold. There were no valuable quantum cores. There were only rows upon rows of identical matte black server drives, wired together in a massive pulsing cluster. And every single drive was already active. Valen stepped cautiously closer to the open shipping crates. A low, rhythmic thrum vibrated through the heavy deck plating beneath his boots. The sound was not mechanical. It felt almost organic, a deep resonance that made his secondary heart flutter with sudden arrhythmia. The matte black drives inside the crates were not in sleep mode. They were networking. Thousands of tiny green indicator lights blinked in chaotic, accelerating patterns, reflecting off the polished silver armor of the customs guards. The guards shifted uncomfortably, aiming their weapons at the boxes, unsure of how to shoot a pile of computing hardware. Valen turned sharply toward Sarah Miller. She had not moved an inch. She had not even blinked at the sight of the drawn weapons. What is this? Valen demanded, his voice echoing too loudly in the massive chamber. You wanted our tech, Sarah replied. Her tone remained perfectly conversational, devoid of any fear. Here is the manual. Page 1. Do not steal from us. Valen spun away from her and lunged back toward the obsidian assessment desk. He needed to sever the docking bay's connection to the main grid immediately. His breathing grew shallow and ragged. A cold, unnatural moisture broke out across his palms. He snatched his data stylus to input the emergency isolation codes, his fingers trembling. The sleek digital signature stylus slipped from his sweat-soaked grip, clattering uselessly against the polished floor and rolling away into the shadows. He cursed and hammered his bare, silver fingers against the terminal glass. A bright red warning icon flashed across the primary display. If the drives are linked directly to the customs network, then the central banking hub must be. Valen froze. His hands hovered uselessly over the console as the terrible realization clicked into place. He watched the data streams multiply exponentially across his screen. The human drives were not extracting data from the Alvari systems. They were injecting it. They were flooding the imperial financial grid with aggressive logic viruses, disguised seamlessly within the massive 70-page trade manifest he had just forced Sarah to sign. He had legally authorized the invasion of his own network. Stop this program, Valen ordered. She shook her head slowly. You approved the transaction, Minister. The late fees are compounding. Valen shouted for the guards to destroy the drives. Heavy plasma rifles whined to life as the guards charged their capacitors, taking aim at the pulsing black boxes. I wouldn't do that, Sarah warned calmly. The terminal screamed. A high-pitched klaxon echoed through the vaulted customs hall, drowning out the hum of the drives. Valen looked at his diagnostic monitor and watched his entire career evaporate in real time. The Imperial system was frantically trying to purge the foreign human code, but it was physically impossible. Because quantum encryption dictates that the moment an unauthorized observer attempts to read the active key state, the fundamental structure of the data collapses and instantly reentangles with a secondary source, meaning the Alvari security scanners had not stolen human technology. They had willingly surrendered their own administrative access. The logic viruses spread like liquid shadow through the station's architecture. The data drops cascaded down Valen's screen in a terrifying waterfall of crimson text. 14,000 sectors were affected simultaneously. 99% power loss was reported across the entire orbital ring. It all stemmed from one single trade deal. The older ministers had built an untouchable empire on predatory contracts. They had suffocated thousands of primitive worlds with inescapable debt. And now, a single human logistics expert wearing a faded synthetic jacket was dismantling their entire galactic civilization with a cracked tablet. Valen's flawless skin rapidly tarnished, the vibrant silver fading to a sickly, dull gray. His perfect posture collapsed. He leaned heavily against the obsidian desk, utterly unable to support his own weight as the gravity of his failure set in. "We don't do wars," Sarah Miller said quietly, picking up her device from the desk. "We do hostile takeovers." And so, the Alvari orbital systems died in perfect silent sequence. One by one, the luminescent silver spires of the capital station flickered and went dark against the void of space. On Valen's primary terminal, the single, primitive logistics application finally completed its loading bar. The Alvari Empire realized, in that blinding moment of collective failure, that their entire economy was now permanently hosted on Earth's planetary servers. They had laid an elaborate legal trap for the prey, only to discover the prey now owned the predator's bank account. An older guard standing near the doorway dropped his heavy plasma rifle. He stared at the humans standing in the dim emergency lighting. They did not fire a single shot. The guard whispered in the dark. They just sent an invoice. The High Council eventually added a new, unshakable law to their sacred texts. Never trade with Earth. But it was far too late. Humanity already held all the keys. The Grand Customs Hall sat in absolute darkness, illuminated only by the functional glow of a cracked screen. Valen remained slumped over the cold desk, his skin forever scarred by the gray hue of defeat. The small digital ledger rested peacefully on the polished surface, its harsh green pixels projecting a new balance for the entire sector. 0.